Alright, in this video I want to talk about economic growth and the determinants of economic growth. And really quickly, economic growth is just going to be the increase in real GDP or real GDP per capita, which is going to be real GDP per person in the economy over a certain period of time. Uh, and what we can do to show this is going to be through an increase in productive capacity. So I really want to make sure that we have this written down. Productive capacity is essentially our potential output. And so what I'm going to write down is it's going to be the maximum possible output for an economy. So it's going to be the max possible output for an economy. And we've seen this before with the production possibilities curve, where that in microeconomics, that was going to be the maximum possible output for a business. This, when we bring this to macro now, it's going to be the maximum possible output for our economy or for our country or for our state or region. When this can increase, we can have economic growth. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for things that can increase our productive capacity. But before we get too far, I want to quickly go over a couple quick things on economic growth. Since 1950, it's increased to 3.1% per year, which I think is pretty impressive. And then per capita, it's been about 2% per year. So there's been some changes in our population as well that are worth noting. I also found this interesting. This is a chart from your textbook. In 1950, the real GDP per capita, if I have it right here, was just over 14,000, and in 2012 it was almost 50,000. And again, because this is real GDP, these numbers are not affected by inflation. So this is not due to inflation at all. This is due to us producing more. And the real GDP per capita is essentially saying what's the final value of the goods and services that each person in the economy produces. So in the United States, each person is producing about $49,000 worth of goods and services. So I think that's pretty interesting. Economic growth essentially leads to just us having more stuff, and it results in higher standards of living. We can have increased leisure time and the expansion and application of human knowledge. Again, these are stolen right from the textbook, but the one that I do want to talk about is higher standards of living. Now, this can be controversial, and if you disagree, that's totally fine. However, on the AP exam, I've seen this as an answer. So if you see a question like, what is one benefit of economic growth? And the answer is higher standard of living, that will be the correct answer. So this might be controversial, but in the AP curriculum, higher standards of living is associated with economic growth. So I really want to make sure that you understand that. I'm going to skip ahead, so I'm going to skip through the modern economic growth slides, and I'll let you read those on your own. And I want to go down to this one. The institutional structures for economic growth. What this is really saying is, what are the things that will create an environment for economic growth? And I think that all of these are going to be important. Again, we need property rights, which is going to be essential to us making anything. Patents and copyrights are going to be, I'll include those within property rights. We need efficient financial institutions. We need to be able to trade using money, widespread education, free trade, and then competitive markets, going back to microeconomics. If we have all of those things, we're going to create an environment for economic growth. This next page is probably going to be the most important page of your PowerPoint. It has the determinants of economic growth and the supply factors as well as the demand factors and this one other efficiency factor. But I really want to spend a couple minutes on the supply factors. And so you've seen this list before. These are all the things that can shift the short-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve, and you saw those back before spring break. I'm going to add in one other one, though, and that's going to be the social, political, or the legal environment. So I'll write social and legal environment. Laws, regulations, cultural norms, all of those things might affect economic growth. Environment, I'll write. And so I've taken these slides, and therefore I've taken this list right from your textbook. So I think that this is in line with what you've been reading. However, it's not necessarily in line with the AP curriculum. So I want to make one major distinction here. Increases in the quantity of natural resources can lead to economic growth. Capital goods can lead to economic growth. And what you might see is the supply of capital goods. You might see that as capital stock. So capital stock is going to be the amount of capital in our economy. So you might see that phrase. That's going to be important. So we talked about natural resources, capital goods, technology, definitely. The social legal environment, definitely. However, human resources, I want to be really careful here. Increases in the quantity of human resources is the part that I want to just make sure that we're careful with. And I'm going to say this, not really. According to the AP curriculum, and I'm only seeing this because I can see answer keys, the AP people don't like increases in labor leading to economic growth. And that took me a little while to figure out, and my best guess is that if we go back to the pizza experiment, we've learned that if we just keep on adding labor, our productivity and then our output might eventually fall. And so if we have a decrease in output, we're not going to have economic growth. So I'm going to put a not really, and then I'm going to put pizza experiment in parentheses here. Just because we hire more people, or just because we have more people in our economy, that does not necessarily mean that we are going to increase our productive capacity and increase economic growth. So keep that one in mind. That can increase it, but it's not a guarantee. So that's a really weak reason to have economic growth if we just have people coming into our country, or if we have more people joining the labor force. If people leave, and you've seen that in the problem set, that can work. Or if there are changes in the quality, now that's super important. That can 100% change economic growth. If we have more degrees, more training, those are things that can definitely affect this. So I want to make sure that that's really clear. Increases in the quantity of human resources, also known as labor, might affect it, but it might not. So keep that in mind. We also need to have people buy the things that we're now going to be making. So that's what the demand factor is. We need these people, businesses, the government, and us households to purchase these goods. We also need to have economic efficiency when we're doing this. So those are going to be super important. We can show economic growth, and I'm going to do this in a minute, but we can show economic growth just by having our production possibilities curve shift out. If you can diagram that, you are effectively diagramming economic growth. And so it's going to be just that easy. And what we're going to need to do here, in order to have economic growth, and then going back to the slides that we had a minute ago, all of these things are going to increase our productivity, except more labor. So keep that one in mind. But if we can increase productivity, we're going to lead to more GDP, which is going to be economic growth. So I want to just clarify this one as well. The size of our workforce is going to be, we'll put an asterisk next to that, maybe. But if we can work more, so if there's more labor hours, more man hours, you might read, if we can work more and work more efficiently, more productively, we're going to end up with a real GDP. So labor productivity is going to be really important in how we can increase our GDP and lead to economic growth. I'm going to skip ahead some of these slides, but these might be interesting for you to look at. These are the things that have led to our increase in productivity. The obvious one, I think, would be technological advance. And just in the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's been an incredible increase in technology. Just the internet is maybe all I need to say about that. We also have, going back to that point, since 1995, we've had a 2.4% increase in productivity. And I think before 95, internet was not at all widely used. But since 95, and mainly since late 90s, the introduction of the internet, wireless technology even more recently, has really changed our productivity. The last thing I want to do is just show you how we can graph economic growth. And so I've taken this from the workbook, and what you've got is, this is a macro production possibilities curve, and you don't need to title this at all, but the reason why this is macro is we're not talking about donuts and cupcakes or, I don't know, bicycles and skateboards. Instead, we're talking about consumer goods, which are going to be the final goods for households to buy, and capital goods, which are going to be the intermediate goods, the machinery for businesses to buy. So those are the two things an economy can make, the finished goods or the intermediate goods. And if there's an increase in both of those, so if I draw this out here, whoops, I don't want to do that. If I draw this here, that's going to be an increase in productive capacity and economic growth. The way that we can show this on our aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve is with a shift out of the short run aggregate supply, because if one of those things shifts short run, it will also shift long run. So I want to draw this in. I'll draw it in a new equilibrium here, and I'll call this YFE1 because our long run has also shifted. So that's how we can draw economic growth. The one thing that I'll add is if there's an expansionary policy that shifts aggregate demand, I'm thinking of expansionary monetary policy in particular, you might also see, and I'm going to get rid of these for right now, you might also see an increase in aggregate demand. So I'll draw this as well, where you have aggregate demand shifting out, 81, short run aggregate supply shifting out, and then your long run aggregate supply shifting out as well. I'll have this one again in our new long run equilibrium. And I'll move this over here. So you might see those two examples of graphing economic growth. The big thing here though is a shift in the long run aggregate supply. If you have the long run aggregate supply shifting to the right, you have economic growth.